jury entering.
Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record once again reflect the presence of the defendant, Mr. Demons, his counsel, the assistant attorneys, the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and all witnesses. Mr. Bello remains on the stand. Ladies and gentlemen, I trust you all had a nice lunch. We're going to resume with Mr. Bello's testimony, so I think you were still on your direct examination, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Bello, we've gone through the projectiles that were recovered in the subject of your January 11th, 2019 report. I want to go now to the projectiles from your March of 2022 report. Showing defense counsel has been marked as states why for identification purposes. No. Other report. March 2022 report. I'm showing for identification purposes only what's been marked as state why. Do you recognize this piece of evidence?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize this piece of evidence?
Again, my initials and CCN numbers was the date that I began and finished the examination, and my initials on the seal.
The large green sticker that's on there, is that placed on by the Broward Sheriff's Office Crime Lab?
Yes,
Is that the same sticker that is identifying all the work done in this case of 18-13127?
yes,
Is it in the same or substantially same condition as once we finish analyzing the items in this package?
yes.
Here at this time, the state would request to state YYN is the next numbered exhibit.
No objection.
It'll be admitted.
States YY would be marked states 49.
Okay, Detective, I'm sorry. Mr. Bello, with regards to this states 49, did you analyze the items inside this package?
Yes, I did.
What are they?
So they are projectiles or projectile fragments that were submitted to the crime lab from the medical examiner's office.
And in terms of the location of where they were recovered from, were you present when they were recovered?
No,
The determination as to where they were recovered from or how you document them in your report, where is that description coming from?
so that's either from the property scene, so that's how the detective or crime scene investigator described it, or from a label on the projectile itself from the medical examiner's office.
So I'm going to start with item, you have one item 30 and then you have 8 sub-items.
Yes.
Why do you do it that way?
So from the time that I wrote the initial report to this secondary report, our protocols just changed, and that we're describing as the primary exhibit, so in this case exhibit 30, as the container containing the evidence. And then we would go on to describe the individual items that were being analyzed underneath that as sub-items.
Okay, so 30.1, 30.2, et cetera, through 30.8.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm going to start with 30.1. What was the G number associated with that?
So 30.1 was G44.
Did you analyze that projectile?
I did.
Did you do it the same way that we talked about with the ones 13, 14, and 15 that we spoke about previously?
Yes, they would all get the same worksheet and the same categories would be analyzed.
And in terms of on 30.1, starting with that one, were you able to determine a caliber measurement?
Yes, it was measured to be 0.410 inches.
And what type of, were you able to determine if there were lands and grooves that you could evaluate?
Yes. So the number of lands and grooves would have been 6. I believe 1 was damaged. but I was able to see 5, and there was a space for an additional.
Okay. And is that consistent with the other projectiles we talked about earlier this morning?
It is.
What was the direction of twist?
It was a right-hand twist.
What was the bullet weight on that?
It weighed 174.8 grains.
Were you able to determine the material it was made of?
It was also composed of copper and lead.
What type of jacket was on that one?
It was, I believe it was unknown as far as the type of jacketing, just because of the damage to the projectile. So it did have a jacket, it was copper jacketed, but I'm not sure exactly what type it was.
Okay, so you can't say full metal jacket.
Right.
And on the, was it magnetic?
No, it was not.
Were the lands and visible grooves measured?
Yes, they were.
And what was the approximate measurements of the lands and grooves?
It was very similar to the other ones. It was .078 to .081 inches for the lands, and the grooves measured to be approximately .115 inches.
Okay, now to speed this up a little bit,
Mhm.
with regards to all the other items, 30.2, 30.3, 30.4, 30.5, 30.6, 30.7, and 30.8, did they all measure approximately the same caliber?
Yes, it did.
And what was that?
It was approximately 40 caliber, consistent with a 40 Smith & Wesson.
Did they all have the no more than 6 lands and grooves?
Yes,
With regards to the direction of twist, could you measure that on each of them?
yes, they were all right-hand twists.
The all, in terms of the cannelures, this particular item, 30 and all sub-items, did they have any cannelures?
No, none of those had cannelures.
The bullet material as to each of them, what were they all?
They were all copper and lead.
With regards to, were they all magnetic or not?
They were all non-magnetic.
The rifling as to each of those, what type was it?
It was all conventional.
Were you able to determine a possible caliber on each of them?
So each of them were consistent with a 40 caliber projectiles, possibly 530, a 40 Smith & Wesson firearm.
Okay, so could you say that each of them were consistent with one another?
Yes, as far as class characteristics, they all line up.
Were you able to give individual characteristics and tie them each together?
So for this set of projectiles, no. So I grouped them into two different groups.
Okay, why did you do 2 different groups?
So the first group that I grouped into had agreement of class characteristics, but because of the damage to the projectiles, I couldn't find agreement in any of the individual characteristics, and there was no disagreement in characteristics either. So for that one, it was just essentially, it could have come from the same firearm, or they could have been fired in the same firearm, and that's exhibits 30.4, 30.2, 30.3, 30.6, 30.7, and 30.8. So those could have been fired in the same firearm based on just overall agreement of the class characteristics.
No. And so it's clear and we're consistent in all of our numbering. 30.1 you already testified was G44.
Yes.
What was 30.2?
It was G57,
30.3?
is G58,
30.4?
G59,
30.5?
G60,
30.6?
G61,
30.7?
G62,
30.8?
and G63.
Okay. The second group that you said you did involved which particular projectiles?
So those were 30.4, 30.1, and 30.5.
Okay, I want to, so 30.4 is in both groups.
Yes.
How is that possible?
It's basically it was a representative that had the best detail to try to compare to all of the groups. So that's the why that one's included in both of them, as both groups were compared to 30.4.
Okay. So with 30.4, 30.1, and 30.5, were you able to draw any conclusions?
So the conclusion was still inconclusive. However, there was agreement of some individual characteristics. So for firearms examination, we have really 3 tiers of inconclusive results. There's inconclusive where only class characteristics are consistent, and that's essentially a 50-50. Maybe they did, maybe they did not come from this gun. There are inconclusive results where there is agreement of class and some individual characteristics, which indicates that they were fired in this firearm, but there's not enough individual detail or not enough agreement of the individual detail to make that next step and say that they're an identification, so that they did all come from that firearm. And then the third category is that there's agreement of class characteristics, however, there is no agreement of any individual characteristics. And so that's basically indicating that even though the class characteristics might agree, it is likely not that firearm. There's just not enough difference to say for 100% that it's not that firearm.
Okay, does that conclude all of the evaluation you did with regards to projectiles in this case?
Yes.
Okay, moving on to cartridge casing. Were you provided some of those to analyze as well?
Yes, I was.
Okay, approaching and showing you what's been previously admitted into evidence as states 35 and states 23. Take a look at those. Do you recognize? So you first looked at states 35?
Yes,
Do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
How do you recognize that exhibit?
Again, based on my initials, employee ID number, as well as the date that I began and date that I finished the examinations, and my initials on the seal. And then the same thing for states 23.
Okay. So on these two exhibits, did you analyze the items contained within?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so if I may. So starting with what you have documented in your report as item number 4, G196.
Correct.
Did you analyze that cartridge casing?
I did.
And how do you analyze a cartridge casing as opposed to a projectile?
So similarly to projectiles, they do get assigned a worksheet that I add to each of the cartridge cases. Those worksheets are going to capture general information about the cartridge cases that will help the examiners determine whether or not there's any consistency in class characteristics across the cartridge cases that were submitted in the case. So the classes that we're looking for, the information categories that we're looking for, are the caliber. We look at the composition, whether there's, the casings are brass and brass, or they're brass and nickel, or any combination of materials located on the cartridge cases. We notate the manufacturer, whether or not there's any presence of ejector marks and extractor marks. We also determine whether or not there's presence of a firing pin impression. Sometimes we are called to compare or examine live ammunition to determine whether or not it was cycled through a firearm. And so sometimes we examine things that don't have a firing pin impression at all because they weren't fired. We'll also document whether or not the particular exhibit was entered into NIBIN. So whenever we do entries into NIBIN, a representative will be entered. So not every cartridge case we receive is entered. It's a representative from the submitted case gets entered in. I'll also document any extra information that might be of value. So if I receive a cartridge case which has pieces of asphalt that are attached to it and maybe it was flattened on one end, I would document any of that information because it might let us know that casing was in the road and it was run over. Or if it's charred, it might have been burnt. And so that information, that if it seems like it may be pertinent, then I would document any of that information as well.
Okay, so if you could explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what is photo 2 depicting?
So the picture is a picture of exhibit number 6 on the left and exhibit number 5 on the right. And it's a comparison which was performed on January 18th. And then the microscope as well as magnification is documented there. And you can see the hairline is this line right here down the middle. So anything on this side is exhibit 6, anything on this side is exhibit 5. Then you can see the agreement starting up here with some of the grosser lines and then all of this fine line agreement in that area as well.
Sorry, you just said that a word we haven't defined yet. The what lines?
So fine line striations is essentially what we would call them. So this particular firearm leaves parallel line striations on fire casings, which means that the breech face was manufactured with some kind of broaching tool, and it has parallel lines that are on that firearm itself. And so any casing that's fired through them should be expected to have similar characteristics. And then once you line them up, you can see that the directionality and everything lines up on these cartridge cases from left to right or right to left. And that's what that orientation and spacing between each of those lines is what makes it unique.
Okay. So going to Exhibit 4,
Mhm.
that was the G196 on that. Did you analyze the caliber of that?
Yes,
And what was that?
it was 40 Smith & Wesson.
What was the case material made of?
It was a brass material, so the casing body was brass, and the primer itself was brass as well.
What was the manufacturer?
It was Blazer.
And just to, in the interest of expediency, on exhibits, your exhibits 4 through 11, so G196 through G203, which are contained in states here,
Yes.
states 23.
Mhm.
Was the caliber the same on each of those?
Yes, it was.
Was the material the same on each of those?
Yes, it was.
And does that go to the case and the primer?
Yes.
Was the manufacturer the same?
Yes, they were all Blazers.
What is looking for sealant?
So sealant is something that manufacturers can apply to this area in between the head stamp and the primer. They apply it, it's essentially a lacquer that gets applied to try to prevent any moisture from getting into the cartridge cases. Sometimes that lacquer can persist through firing, and sometimes it doesn't. So what happens in the firing process is after the firing pin strikes the primer, this whole pocket will actually be expelled out of the cartridge case and into the firearm by the pressure inside of the cartridge. And then the cartridge reseats itself through the cycling process. So if there was a sealant around that, it can be pushed out during the firing process. But sometimes, so there's certain manufacturers which have a characteristic sealant, so like Cellular and Below is an example of one that puts a very thick red colored lacquer on its sealant. And so if we observed it, we would document it was observed. But the absence doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't one there, it's just it wasn't there when it was submitted to the lab.
Did you document sealant on any of these 8 casings?
I don't believe there was sealant present on any of them.
If you need to refresh your recollection, please.
So there was no sealant present on any of them.
In terms of the extractor marks, were you able to document those on each of these exhibits?
Yes, I was.
Were they consistent from 4 through 11?
Yes, they were.
What about the ejector marks?
I believe there were ejector marks. Yes, so there were observable ejector marks on all of the cartridge cases.
And were they consistent with one another on items 4 through 11, your items?
Yes, they were.
And that's again G196 through G203.
Correct.
The weathering or anything on these cartridges, is that something you document?
If it was something that was extremely weathered, yes. So if an abnormal presence of rust, or if there was some kind of debris, whether it's dirt or grass or something, would be documented, yes.
Did you document that in this case?
I didn't observe it.
In terms of the DNA or MVAC procedure, are you involved in the processing of the casings at that point?
No, I'm not.
In the timeline, do you get the casings before or after the MVAC is done?
Theoretically, I would get them before. So ideally, they would get to me before. Sometimes, and I suppose it's through the process of investigation, they believe they have enough DNA or they think they have DNA from a certain source, and if it doesn't pan out, they may need to come back and process the cartridge cases. So it's not unusual for them to come back and after I've handled casings to then go ahead and process the casings.
Oh. So what do you do to ensure that your DNA doesn't wind up on casings?
So I try to use gloves as much as possible, but we're not a clean unit. So almost inevitably, if I handled them, my DNA would end up on the cartridges.
And if
Almost
you can
inevitably.
explain what you mean by a clean unit?
So clean in the sense that our protocols are essentially for safety for handling firearms. We're not really looking for biological contaminants from case to case. So we don't clean our workspaces every time we work a case, right? That's a requirement for our DNA units. Anytime they're gonna work a case and they start a new one, they have to clean up everything in between. So bleach and wipe down of their entire work area every time they have a new case. In our unit, we have a lot of tools that we use. We have a lot of different mechanisms that we end up using, brass tracks. We shoot into a shoot board. And those items, while clean, are not cleaned with bleach every time we work a case.
So they're not sterile.
Correct, they're not sterile.
So in terms of for the DNA process, is it best practice to do that before it gets to you?
Yes, that's the best practice.
Continuing back on through items 4 through 11, G186 to G203, did you have a conclusion as to each of those particular exhibits?
Yes, so each of those cartridge cases were found to have been fired in one 40 Smith & Wesson firearm. So there was only one firearm which fired all of those cases.
And so that is again G186 to G203, 4 through 11.
Correct.
Was there any things that were different between those in numbers 4 through 11?
There may have been minute differences, but there was enough agreement of individual characteristics that made it obvious that they were fired from the same firearm.
So moving on to states 35. You evaluated this particular item of evidence?
Yes.
Oh. Is that your initials and sticker up at the top?
Yes, it is.
Okay, what is in your exhibit 12?
It's another 40 Smith & Wesson caliber Blazer cartridge case.
Was this evaluated on the same date and time as states 23?
Yes, it was.
What steps did you take to make sure that what is your exhibit 12 did not get switched with any of the other evidence, the other 8?
So the cartridge cases, again, will be labeled with permanent marker or a electric stripe with the information from the case, specifically having that it is exhibit, in this particular case, exhibit 12 versus the other exhibits.
Because they're packaged in different packaging, does that tell you anything about your processing?
For us, it doesn't really change how we're going to process it. So whether we do have different agencies which submit things very differently. Some agencies will actually submit every cartridge case in a separate package. So whenever we receive the packaging, it doesn't really change how we're going to analyze the evidence, because the question ultimately is still the same question: is this 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge case, could it have come from the same firearm which produced the other 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge cases?
Okay. So the G number here on what is in evidence as states 35, how did you document that?
It's a G138.
And were you present at the Miramar Substation 2811 Southwest 186th Avenue when it was recovered on October 26th of 2018?
No, it was not.
Going on to exhibit number 12. I want to go through that. Were you able to determine what caliber exhibit number 12 was?
It was 40 Smith & Wesson.
What was the case material and primer material?
They were both brass.
What was the manufacturer?
Blazer.
Was there sealant documented?
No.
Were there extractor marks?
Yes.
Were there ejector marks?
Yes.
Was there a firing pin shape?
Yes.
What was the firing pin shape on exhibit 12?
It was hemispherical.
And is that documented in what is photo 2 in the USB drive?
Yes. So this is the firing pin impression on this side, and that circular shape is the hemispherical shape that I was referring to.
When, Mr. Vella, when you're given these pieces of evidence, Are you told which one is important? Are you told which one is a value or anything like that?
Sometimes they give us some information. It's typically in the form of a CL-15 or a crime lab submission form. Luckily or unluckily, I guess however you would like to look at it, for firearms, that information really doesn't matter to us because the ultimate question for us is still the same. So it doesn't matter really for us where this exhibits were collected, where they came from, who they believe they're affiliated with. For us, what really matters is, can I objectively say that these items came from one source or did they come from different sources? So that's really the question that we're always trying to answer.
Okay. So we've talked about the hemispherical firing pin shape. Was Exhibit 12, G138, magnetic?
No, it was not.
Okay. In terms of, did you come to a conclusion as to whether or not Exhibit 12 was consistent with the casings of your Exhibits 4 through 11?
Yes, it was.
How so?
So Exhibit 12 shared all of the same class characteristics as the remaining cartridge cases that were submitted in the case. And upon further examination and comparison on the microscope, it had sufficient agreement of individual characteristics to tie it to the same firearm, which produced the other cartridge cases in the case.
Can you say that the projectiles that were recovered came from any specific casing?
No, I can't say that.
And in terms of the list of, and you mentioned the, going on to photo 3 here, what are we looking at in this photo?
So this is the entry or the images of the entry into NIBIN. So these are the images that would eventually get searched by the NIBIN database. The first image is the overall image of the head stamp, so that includes the information, the manufacturer, caliber, and the primer detail that's there. The other pictures, so the first image doesn't typically get compared or correlated. It's the more detailed pictures that are underneath that do get compared and get a correlation score, so score of agreement. And then they're just different lighting images. They're all the same types of images, they're all just different lighting. So the top left image is a 2D black and white image. This image is what they call a 6 o'clock grayscale image. This is a firing pin image, and then this is the all in focus image. And when I'm looking at these on the computer screen, typically I'm looking at one of these images, so not all of them. This is just how it prints out in the system. And then the bottom two images are just two different lightings of the ejector mark. So that's this little area there is the ejector mark, and that's the, I believe this is the 3 o'clock lighting, and this is the 6 o'clock lighting.
And when you say 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock lighting, what do you mean?
It's the directionality of the light from within the actual system. So the system itself is pretty much automated. So once I insert the casing and put the relevant case information, I just click acquire, and then it begins to acquire all of these images on its own. So it automatically focuses, it'll automatically place these different rings. So like this is a red ring here, this has a blue ring on the edges. So it automatically places all of that information in there, and those are the different details that will ultimately be correlated by the system itself.
And in terms of any associations or anything like that, were you notified of any associations?
No, so no associations were made in this particular case.
And is that updated on a regular basis?
Yes, so if any association were made after, which can happen if a firearm comes in at a later date and gets test fired and put in, it can link to this particular case. Up until now, that hasn't happened.
Okay. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Ma'am.
Counsel, where you may proceed.
Mr. Bello, at the conclusion of your testimony, I think you should hand out certificates. Fundamental identification of dealing with firearms. That's number one. So you've got a lot of certificates to hand out. Fair enough? Okay. You examined these projectiles and casings on 2 different dates, correct?
Correct.
One was on, I think your report was 1/11,
Correct.
and the other one was on 3/3 of 22.
Correct.
1/11 of 2019, and then 3/3 of 2022.
Correct.
Could you tell us, beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt after all of this examination, how many firearms created these casings and projectiles?
So what I can say is that one firearm fired the casings, so one firearm produced the cartridge cases that were submitted. And as far as the projectiles are concerned, I can say that 2 of them came from one firearm, and then the other ones could have come from the same firearm, but I cannot conclusively say that there was only.
Okay, so there could be more than one firearm that created all of these items, correct?
As far as the projectiles, yes.
Okay, fair enough. Now, after you did all of this analysis, were you able to determine what gun was used to create these projectiles and casings?
No, in the absence of a firearm, I cannot conclusively say it was one or the other.
Have you heard the term trajectory reconstruction?
Yes.
What is that?
So that's typically an examination that's done using either rods, some people use lasers, to match points on a line that would designate the trajectory of a projectile as it was traveling.
And that would be able to place, supposedly, if you can do it, where the shooter or shooters were when they fired the firearms.
Certainly, at least the firearm.
Okay.
So it would be the muzzle of the firearm is technically the origin point. Yes.
And that would be in someone's hand,
Somebody's
correct?
Right.
Let me see that. What we're talking about is being able to tell where the muzzle was, so you in essence would be able to tell where the shooter.
Correct.
I just wanted to play with
No
it.
problem.
Okay. When you do a trajectory reconstruction and you're attempting to find out where the gun is and where the so-called shooter or shooters were, are there certain variables that come into play?
Certainly, there's a lot of variables that come into play.
Why don't you tell us what some of the variables are?
So some of the variables that can come into play is whether or not there were intervening objects. So do you have a beginning and an end point? Do you have a middle point? Right. So if I only have, as an example, a hole in a wall, but I don't have anything else, I don't have somewhere I could put a rod through, or that I could start the directionality of a laser from. Right. So without that, I'm basically dead in the water, because I could start it from any point in this room. Let's say there's a bullet hole in that exit sign back there, and that's the only hole that I have. It'd be very difficult for me to be able to place where the person originated from. Now, if an object is, let's say, 3-dimensional, not 2-dimensional, and the bullet travels through that object, then you can pass the rod through and then find a directionality. There's still variables with that. How far away were they? How close were they? And so that's kind of, it gives you a line, but the point upon the line that the firearm was is the question.
How about how the, may I approach, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
How the person held the gun?
Sure.
There's a thing called holding it tight. That could affect how you position the shooter or shooters, correct?
Sure.
If he holds it upside down or sideways?
The origin point should technically still be the same,
Okay.
technically speaking.
Okay, how about, we said tight, how about if he holds it very loose?
If you limp wrists, as we would call it.
What's that term?
Limp wristing.
You're way
Yes.
above me. Limpers.
Yeah, so normally when you're firing a firearm, you want to try to cradle the weight of the firearm, and that's usually in your wrist. Limp wristing is just, you're letting your wrist kind of rock with the firearm. And so while the origin point may be similar, the trajectory of the projectile leaving the barrel may be different.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
How about the weather conditions?
So as far as trajectory is concerned, it can play a role over significant distance. So whether, I'm sure most of us have heard or seen stories of people making sniper shots at a mile or a quarter mile or 3/4 of a mile. When you're shooting at distances like that, you have to take into account weather, wind. You actually have to take into account the rotation of the earth. So the people who can shoot out at that distance are exceptionally rare. But to be accurate at those distances, you have to be able to mitigate for gravity, wind, and for the spinning of the earth. So those are factors that can play a role in significant distance. Now, if we're talking about a distance of 2 feet or 3 feet, then the weather's going to play a much less significant role.
How about the object that the projectile hits?
Yes, I can certainly.
Like glass?
Right, so whether it's glass and the type of glass plays a role. Is it impact glass? Is it tempered glass? Is it standard glass? So all of these things can play a role. Is it a thicker pane of glass? Is it bulletproof glass? Is it soundproof glass? So I mean, there's a lot of different variabilities. And then obviously the thickness of that glass plays a role. The thicker the glass is, the more likely that the projectile is going to be significantly damaged and change its flight after it leaves that glass. Also, the angle of impact where it hits the glass can change after it travels through. You might have a projectile that's traveling straight at glass, and then after it passes through the projectile, through the glass, it can travel downward, it can travel upwards. It all depends on the angles of the glass and the angle that the projectile was approaching the glass at.
How about the grain weight of the ammunition?
So the of the projectile itself.
Yeah.
So that can play a role because obviously the heavier an object is, with the force being applied to it, the more likely it is to stay in its directed path. That's kind of going back to that sniper scenario. That's why most snipers are using very large calibers. They are more likely to stay in flight longer and be less subjected to these changes than lighter, smaller projectiles.
And if the shooting occurred inside a car, for instance, would the arm length matter of the so-called shooter or shooters?
It could.
And whether or not the person was leaning in one direction?
Sure, yeah, you're working in a very small environment.
Okay, so there's a lot of variables that one must take into consideration
Yes.
before you say where the gun was or where the shooter or shooters were when they fired this firearm.
Right.
And if you don't take those variables into consideration, you're just giving a estimate of where everybody was, correct?
I assume so. I mean, I'd have to see the situation, but yes.
Okay. And you would consider that to be not proof beyond into the
Objection, Your Honor.
As a manager of the Broward Sheriff's Office tool and, what's the title, tool and?
Fireman tool work unit.
Okay. You certainly would want to take all those variables in before you told this jury or any jury.
Yeah, scientifically, I would want to make sure that I'm accounting for as many variables as possible whenever rendering an opinion.
Otherwise, it would be just a guess, an
Yes.
estimate, right?
Right, I want to give a scientifically valid opinion.
Fair enough. Could I have one moment, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
I think I took that. Awesome, thank you. Deputy Attorney, redirect to this witness.
Briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Bello, counsel asked you about arm length and if it matters. Does arm length have any effect on the ability of someone to pull a trigger?
No.
Can the trigger be pulled with an arm fully extended?
Yes.
Can it be pulled with it next to a person's body?
Yes.
Is there anything that would prevent a trigger from being pulled in any orientation?
No. So the firearms are designed so that The firearm itself is an autonomous form, so the only thing that's required is for this trigger to be pulled, and whether it's upside down, sideways, any which way, apart from something blocking it, it will function. So something has to be impeding the function of the firearm for it to function.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Counsel, is this witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Hold on.
Yes.
Thank you. You may step down, sir.
Thank you.
You're excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Counsel, who's your next witness?
State calls James Morano.
Good afternoon. You are James Morano.
Yes, sir.
Welcome. This is our witness stand over here. When you get there, you just remain standing for a bit. You put the things down. Remain standing. Raise your right hand and be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please state your full legal name for the record.
James Morano,
Please spell the first and last name for the court.
Jamesmarano.
Thank you, sir.
Please have a seat. Mr. Morano, that microphone in front of you, adjust up or down, but does not move back and forth.
Thank you.
Are you ready to proceed?
Yes.
Counsel, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you introduce yourself to the members of the jury, tell them where you're employed?
My name is James Morano. I'm a senior crime laboratory analyst with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in Orlando, Florida.
And how long have you been employed by the, we'll call it FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
20 years.
Okay? And in what capacities during those 20 years?
I've been a crime laboratory analyst in the trace material section in the Orlando laboratory.
And can you tell us your official title?
Senior crime laboratory analyst.
And can you briefly describe the nature of your work?
In the trace material section, we're tasked with recovering, recognizing, examining, and comparing items of trace materials or trace evidence. These are typically things like glass and paint, things that are broken during the commission of a crime or some incident. And they're submitted to our laboratory from police departments and sheriff's offices, and we're asked to compare them and to write a report about our findings.
So law enforcement agencies within the state of Florida can make submissions to the FDLE.
Yes.
Specifically, can you tell us about your specialization in glass? How long have you done that?
I completed the glass training program within FDLE in 2008, and I've been working cases in both paint and glass for about 14, almost 15 years.
And can you tell us about your formal education?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Forensic Science from the University of New Haven in West Haven, Connecticut. I was able to double major during that time, so I also have a Bachelor of Science in Biology, and I graduated in 2002.
And as part of your training and certification that's required by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, can you tell us about some of those trainings?
Yes, so when I moved to Florida in 2003 and I entered the paint training program within FDLE, that's a 2-year training program. It's very comprehensive. It's broken up into 2 phases. There's an academic phase that includes lectures and practical exercises as well as tests, oral, written, and practical tests. After completing that, I did some casework in paint, and then I entered the glass training program, and I did a similar training program within glass. It's about a 1.5-year long training program. After I completed that, I was able to do independent casework in both of those material types.
And are there any continuing requirements that you currently hold or that you do throughout the time you've been employed by FDLE to keep up to date in your field?
Yeah, we try to do continuing education as frequently as possible. I have attended many seminars, workshops, virtual workshops the last several years. But I've taken some week-long training courses, either in trace evidence generally, in forensic science, or specifically with regard to paint, glass, testifying in court, statistics, things like that, anything related to trace evidence.
And are you a member of any professional organizations or any associations within your field?
Yes, I'm a member of the American Society of Trace Evidence Examiners, known as ASTE.
And how about your certification within FDLE? What are you certified as?
So FDLE certifies me to work independent casework in both paint, it includes polymers, so it's paint polymers as well as glass.
How much of your time would you say is devoted to glass analysis?
Typically it would be 50% of my time, but the last few years it's been more. I've been involved in almost exclusively anything having to do with glass in the laboratory. We have a trainee that I just got out of training, so I trained him the last several years. I am responsible for the instrumentation that is used to analyze glass, so I have to maintain it, I have to validate it if we get a new instrument to make sure that it's working properly. I write the standard operating procedures and the work instructions for those instruments, as well as anything else related to glass. And I've been working all the glass work for FDLE for several years.
So you're doing both an administrative role as well as a forensic role?
Yeah, I would say that, sure.
Approximately how many samples of glass evidence have you examined during your career?
Hundreds, several hundreds, I would say.
Okay. And does that include casework?
Yeah, I would say training and casework. I've looked at several hundreds of glass samples in the last 14 years.
How about your prior testimony in court? Have you previously testified as an expert in the area of trace evidence or trace materials?
Yes, I've testified 14 times in 9 different counties in the state of Florida.
And 14 times since what year?
I didn't have the opportunity to testify until 2012, so in the last 11 years I've testified about 14 times.
And as far as proficiency training, is that continuing and ongoing during your time?
You're referring to proficiency testing?
Proficiency testing.
Okay, yes. Every year we do have to take a proficiency test in the subdisciplines that you work. So I have to take a test in paint and a test in glass every year. And I have to get the right answer to continue doing that work.
And are you currently up to date?
Yes.
And in this specific case, were you asked to examine items of glass evidence?
Yes, I was.
And I'm going to refer you to FDLE number 2019-05-02577. Is that a unique number that is assigned by FDLE?
Yes, that's the unique case number.
Okay. And when cases come in, they're assigned a FDLE unique number, correct?
Yes.
Is that how you track the evidence in the case?
Yes.
And where is the evidence is coming from other departments, correct?
Yes.
And what did you receive for examination in this particular case?
In this case, I received 8 items of evidence. They were numbered by FDLE, items 1 through 8.
And were they previously numbered by the department that sent them to you?
Yes.
Do you recall the department?
It was the Miramar Police Department.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm going to approach different exhibits. What's already in evidence is states 42. Can you take a look at that? And do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And how is it that you recognize it?
I see the FDLE case number, the item numbers, and my initials in my handwriting.
So you're able to identify it based on the packaging as well?
Yes, the packaging and my initials are on the seal that I resealed.
Okay, and I'm going to show you states, what's already in evidence is states 22. Do you also recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
And how is it that you recognize it?
In the same way, the FDLE case number, item numbers, and my initials are on the packaging as well as on the seals.
And are those, what item numbers, would those equate to your FDLE item numbers?
These are item numbers 1 through 5.
Okay, and in states 42, those are item numbers,
These are item numbers 6, 7, and 8.
okay, and I'm going to show you what's been pre-marked for identification purposes only as states ZZ. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And how is it that you recognize it?
Also by my initials, the case number, the item number in my handwriting, and my initials on the seals.
And do these exhibits collectively represent what you were provided with for the analysis in this case?
Yes, it does.
Any changes, or is it in the same, substantially same condition as you last saw it?
These are in the same condition as I last saw it, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move into evidence what was pre-marked to say ZZ as the next numbered exhibit.
Is there any objection?
No.
It'll be admitted.
States ZZ will be marked states 50.
Mr. Moran, I'm going to leave these with you. There's some gloves there and a pair of scissors.
All right, so let's go through the 5 question items labeled under FELE as 1 through 5. What do you reference those samples as?
So these are represented as being found at the scene. The scene was described as US 27. So all 5 items were found in one scene.
Okay, and states number, I believe 20, is that states number 22 or 42? If I may, first, John?
Yes, ma'am.
What's this?
Yes.
22?
22. So let's refer to states 42. What are those samples from?
These are represented as being class standards from a vehicle, from the Jeep Compass. It was described as being a standard from the front passenger window, the rear passenger window, and then a sample from the rear window.
And what are you tasked with when you're provided with these items?
My job is to open up the evidence, inventory what's there, describe what's there, and then compare the 2 samples. And typically the question is, there's question samples found someplace, and the agency wants to know, is it like another sample? Is it like a sample from the window, a broken window? Basically asking, could it have come from that method?
So it's essentially a hypothesis, right? Are items 1 through 5 compared or of the same nature as items 6 through 8?
Yes, I'm looking to see if they're like one another.
Okay. So when you get those items, what is it that after you've documented the items and everything like that, what are you doing next?
After I document them and take inventory by taking notes and pictures, then I actually start the comparison part. And I'm doing a side-by-side comparison. So I'm looking to see, I'm actually looking for differences. Can I see any differences between these 2 samples? So I'm looking at the color, the thickness of the samples. Can I see what type of glass it is? Is it window glass or is it container glass, like glass from a bottle? Generally speaking, that's what I'm doing first. And if I don't find any differences, then as I progress through the examination, I'm doing more detailed comparisons using microscopes and instrumentation.
All right, I'm going to stop you there. So that analysis that you just discussed, is that your macro analysis?
Yeah, macroscopic is a fancy way of saying with the naked eye. Yeah.
So essentially you're doing an overview.
Yes.
And what is your next method or your next step?
The next step would be a microscopic examination. I use a low-powered microscope at my workstation, and I'd be comparing the samples side by side, looking for microscopic features that would either tell me what kind of glass it is, or if there's any differences between them.
And can you describe in detail what you're doing as far as the microscopic approach? Like how are you looking at each glass and which samples?
In this case, these fragments were rather large, so I didn't really need to use the microscope as much as I do in other types of cases. But for instance, I'm looking at the fractured characteristics, so I'll take the fragments and look at the side of it, and that would instruct me what kind of glass it is, as opposed to is it tempered or non-tempered glass, things like that. Kind of generally, what type of glass is it?
And is there further analysis as you go through? That would be your microscopic stage. Is there further analysis?
The next, after the microscopic, yes, there would be instrumental examinations where I'm using an instrument or a machine to provide data about the sample. So one of those tells me chemical information about the glass, so I can see what the chemical composition of the glasses are. and another one is called a refractive index. And I can measure the refractive index of both samples and compare those values that I get.
Outside of the microscopic analysis stage, are you using any other equipment during the, for instance, chemical composition review stage or the refractive index stage?
I use a micrometer to measure the thickness of the fragments to see if they're the same thickness. And I also use an ultraviolet lamp looking at the surface of the glass. If one surface fluoresces or glows brightly, then that tells me how that glass was manufactured. If it does do that, then I can say that it's consistent with float glass, meaning it was made using the float glass process. And that's just to kind of tell me what kind of glass it is again.
Okay, so you kind of explained the general broad overview. Can you give us a little background into what makes glass even unique and how does it apply to your discipline, right?
If I can explain how glass is made, it might assist the jury.
Would that aid in your testimony?
Yes.
Yeah.
So float glass is the most common manufacturing process to make window glass. Essentially, you have raw materials, which are minerals like sand, soda ash, and lime, that are mined from the earth and they're melted down in a furnace. And that molten mixture is poured over a tin bath. So it's molten tin, and the glass floats on top of it. That's why it's called float glass. The difference in density allows that to happen. And what that allows the manufacturer to do is to slowly pull that ribbon of glass over the surface of that tin. They can control the thickness of it, and you also get extremely smooth, flat surfaces. So that's why modern window glass looks flawless. You can see through it, there's no defects in it typically. So that tin actually leaches into the glass, and that's why I can see that tin or float surface when I use the ultraviolet lamp. Thank you, I appreciate that.
We'll take a minute.
Thank you. Excuse me, thanks.
So is glass unique between manufacturers?
It's hard to say. I like to speak more in terms of plants, right? So glass is made in a big manufacturing plant. There's probably over 200 float glass plants globally. So there's many plants making glass 24/7 all the time. So from plant to plant, there's going to be differences because they get the raw materials from locally sourced areas. The manufacturing process itself will change the composition of the glass. For instance, that furnace that I talked about where they melt everything, it's made of bricks, zirconium bricks. That zirconium can break down over time and get into the glass. So you'll see levels of zirconium increase and decrease over time from one plant. So I can't say that the glass came from a specific plant because that plant's going to change the end product over time. So there's a lot of variation in glass from plant to plant and within one plant over time.
So essentially, for instance, Toyota, they have an assembly line of plant that they're creating or manufacturing glass for their vehicles. Within that manufacturing plant, there's going to be differentiations within the glass that's manufactured in that one plant.
I would agree, except I don't know if Toyota makes their own glass. They would get their glass from a manufacturer
Yes, from a
and they put it on their vehicles. And there's no rhyme or reason as to where they're getting their glass from. They can get their glass from one plant 1 year, and then next year they can get their glass from somewhere else. And they can change mid-year if they have to, depending on supply issues. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the evidence that you were provided with. And if you, Your Honor, maybe the witness step down to assist in the
Yes, sure.
evidence.
You
You
can
can
step
bring the
down, sir.
packaging. We're
Yeah.
able to view it for, and the scissors.
Bring it
Yes.
to you.
And we'll start with the known sample.
Okay.
If you can go ahead and open that one up.
Where should I do that?
We can do it right here. If you put it under the light.
So if you put it under the green light, the jury can see.
So this is my handwriting, item 6, item 7, and item 8.
And are you able to open the glass, so, open the container so we can see the glass particles?
I can.
Do you need the scissors?
Yes, please. Just gonna do one at a time so I don't
Yep.
have any incidents. Confusing them. So this is item 6.
Repeat that for the court reporter, please.
Yes, this was item 6 that was just opened.
Okay. And in your macro analysis, can you explain to us what you're looking at?
Yes. So that little plastic dish is what the samples I actually took out of this tin to use in my analysis. I did look at everything, so when I'm taking inventory, I'm in the sense of looking for glass that doesn't belong. I'm looking for different populations of glass, different types of glass. And if they all look the same, then I consider that they're all the same type of glass. So I would do that with the naked eye, and if I have any question, I could use a microscope to look in that pile of glass and see if there's anything that doesn't belong or is not like these other ones. I was looking at the color, the type of glass that it is, and if I had to, I can look at the thickness of them to measure that.
Okay, and as far as item 5, or 6, 7, and 8, they were very similar in nature? Or from a known, how
So-
would you characterize it?
So item 6 was the one that's represented as being from the front passenger window. That one is light blue-green in color. Once I open up 7 and 8, you'll see that they're actually dark gray in color. So there are 2 types of glass present in these standards.
Okay. I just adjust this for a second for you. Sorry.
This one is item 7. And again, this is the plastic Petri dish that I put in there to separate out glass that I examined in further detail. This was the glass that was submitted to me. As you can see, it's dark gray in color, so it's different from the item 6 glass.
Okay.
And this was represented as being from the rear passenger window.
And when you're ready, we'll look at item number 8.
So again, item 8, this is the plastic Petri dish that I put in here. This was all the glass that was submitted, and this represented the rear window of the vehicle. And again, you can see it's dark gray in color. So it's different from item 6, which was light blue-green in color.
Okay. And you're taking samples you notated in that Petri dish. Why are you taking the samples and not, for instance, utilizing all the glass?
So I would say that my examination does include all of the glass. I'm looking at all of them when I open it up, and I'm taking that inventory, I'm taking pictures and taking notes of what I see, and then I separate out some for further analysis, for detailed analysis. So I don't have to go back into the tin every single time. I could portion out some of this glass since I'm considering them all to be like one another. Visually, I'll take some out, and that's what I'm using for further examination.
It's like when you did a science test in class, you took the Petri dish and you put a sample of what you were using from, right?
Yes.
I'll give you a chance to put those back in, and then we'll swap out.
Do they need to be resealed?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Just put
Put them back inside.
Yep.
And these are items 1 through 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And with respect to items 1 through 5, are you aware of the origin when you receive these glass samples?
No, I'm only told that they were found at a scene, that they're questioned in nature.
Okay. So for instance, you don't know that it comes from a side window glass, correct?
No.
Okay. And so you can go ahead and open up each sample.
So this is item 1. And like before, there's a petri dish for my analysis where I separated out. These are the samples that were actually analyzed in detail, but I did examine all of the glass in this tin. I looked at it with the naked eye and with a microscope just to take inventory and to describe them.
Okay.
And these are all light blue-green in color. So this is item 2. Here's the plastic dish that I put in here. So these are the 5 fragments, 5 or 6 fragments that I separated out and I analyzed in detail. But I did look at everything in this tin, and you can see that these are dark gray in color. They're different from item 1, which was the light blue-green in color.
Let me adjust this a little because it's very...
So at this time, when I opened up each of these, I made note that there were 2 populations of glass present. There was a light blue-green population and a dark gray population. So I knew that there were 2 types of glass found at the scene, at least 2.
And why is the color significant?
Because it's a discriminating characteristic. It allows me to distinguish different glasses. Item 3. Once again, the plastic dish with the sample of glass that I separated out, and there are numerous light blue-green fragments in this item. This is item 4. Sure. Item 4. Again, the plastic container that I made and numerous fragments of light blue-green glass. I will add in this item, I noted that there was, I don't know if you can see it, but there was a bright green fragment.
If you wait a moment for it to adjust it.
So this fragment right here, that's kind of by itself, that one is actually a different color than the rest. It's bright green. When I analyzed it further, I saw characteristics that were consistent with container glass, so I could tell it did not come from a window. It probably came from a bottle or a container. The last one is item 5. Again, the plastic container. And there's some apparent plant material with glass fragments in this tin. In this one, there was one, you can kind of see it stands out, that one bright green fragment right here. It's different from the other one, so it's not like the light blue-green glass. It's bright green in color, and it also had characteristics consistent with container glass. So I can say that that one did not come from a window.
And as far as what's in evidence now, it states 50. Did you originally receive it separately packaged?
No, I made this package.
And why is that?
There were fragments in items 1 and 3, which is glass from the scene, that appeared to have a reddish-brown residue on them. So I thought that might be significant, so I repackaged them separately and I preserved them so they can go back to the original agency. If they wanted to pursue further examinations, they can. So I did no further examinations with these glass fragments.
So you took a sample from 1 and 3 and you itemized it as 1.1.
Yes.
Okay. That.
I'm going to open it.
All right, you can take your seat.
Okay, ultimately, you were able to, after your analysis, go through and make your own opinion as to the origin of this subject glass or the unknown glass. Is that correct?
Yes, I compared, so that, like I said, there were two populations of glass, so I compared the light blue-green glass from the scene to the light blue-green glass standards from the vehicle. Standard, there's one standard. And then I compared the dark green glass from the scene, item 2, to the dark, sorry, I think I misspoke, the dark gray glass in item 2 to the dark gray standards from the vehicle, which are items 7 and 8.
And so what was your ultimate opinion as to the origin of the glass?
So I found no differences between them. So my ultimate conclusion is that the two populations of glass from the scene, the light blue-green glass and the dark gray glass, were like the standards from the Jeep Compass, meaning they either came from that vehicle or they came from another source of glass having the same exact characteristics. That means it would have to have the same color, the same thickness, the same refractive index, as well as the same chemical composition. In my professional opinion, I find that latter possibility of it coming from another source somewhat unlikely.
Okay, and you mentioned the uniqueness of each thing. So for instance, that the glass that's in evidence as states 22 and 42, you said they have the same complete or the same thickness. Why is that significant in your analysis?
Because it can be a discriminating characteristic. If glasses differ by a certain amount, we have a criteria that we follow. If they differ by a certain amount, then I could say that they couldn't have come from the same window if they're different thicknesses.
And what type of glass is in states 22 and 42?
So all the glass that I described is what I call tempered float sheet glass. Tempered means that it's that cubed, diced glass that you see when a side window of a vehicle breaks. It's considered safety glass, so those small pieces won't cut you if the vehicle gets into an accident or if the window is broken. Tempered glass is found in your home too. Maybe your shower door or sliding glass door may have tempered glass. As opposed to non-tempered glass, which is going to break into sharp, pointy shards that could cut you. So I can tell that just by its appearance and some of its microscopic features that's the kind of glass it is. It's tempered glass. By float, I mean it was made using the float process. So when I use that ultraviolet lamp, one surface fluoresced brightly, which is an indication of the surface that was in contact with that tin bath. So some of that tin leached into that surface. It fluoresces, glows brightly under the UV lamp, so I can call it float glass. The last descriptor is that it's sheet glass, which just means that it's window glass. I can tell that the surfaces are flat, they're smooth, those fragments are not from a bottle or a container or tableware, they're from a window or a door or some other type of flat glass.
And the tempered float sheet window glass is consistent with what manufacturers would use to place on vehicles, as opposed, like you said, to glassware that you may have in your house.
Correct. Most almost all side windows and rear windows are going to be made out of tempered float sheet glass.
And as specifically pointed out, I think it was item number 4 and item number 5, that there were some small fragments of bright green glass that you were able to separate as another origin of glass.
Yes, there's one fragment in each.
Okay, and you were able to determine and separate those fragments, 1 in each, 4 and 5, from the other sample, correct? Contained within those samples.
Yes, they were different from the glass in those tins. So in item 4 and in item 5, they were different. And they were also different from the glass standards. So they could not have come from the vehicle windows. They're a different color and they're a different type of glass.
And just to clarify, because I'm going to be clear, so for instance, item number 4, you have your own sample that you pulled out. That sample was the tempered float sheet window glass that you're saying is consistent with vehicle glass, correct?
Yes,
However, the small fragment, the bright green glass, was from a different origin, meaning it could have come from a container or another source.
correct.
And same for item number 5. Your sample was consistent with the tempered float sheet glass that comes from vehicle glass window. But the one small fragment, that was the bright green glass, was from a different source.
Correct.
And as far as the dark gray glass in item number 7 and 8, what was the, why is that glass dark green, for lack of a better term, versus the other glass, which we see as a light green or bluish characteristic?
Typically, modern vehicle manufacturers make the rear passenger windows and the rear window dark gray. It's just a natural tinting so you don't have to put an aftermarket tint on it. It just tints the passenger part of the vehicle.
So you're able to distinguish that dark gray as coming from the rear of the vehicle as opposed to the light, the other colored glass coming from, for instance, a passenger side.
Correct. Usually the front passenger windows are going to be blue-green-ish in color, and then the rear ones will be dark gray, especially in modern vehicles. It's very common now.
And also, as to items number 6, 7, and 8, you indicated, well, let me ask you about the edges of the glass. Was there anything significant in the edges of those glass?
I'm not sure what you mean.
So for instance, the rounded finished edges.
Yes. One of the, I'm not sure which exhibit, but one of the exhibits had a rounded finished edge, which is consistent with what you would see in a side window. So if you lower your side window and you feel the top of it, it's smooth, it's rounded. That's so it doesn't cut you. So we see that in casework. It's an indication of where it came from.
You said you didn't recall. Would your report refresh your recollection as to
would.
where that was found?
Yes.
If you have a moment to refresh your recollection and look up when you were here.
So yes, it was glass in items 6 and 7 that had the rounded finished edges, and those were the 2 samples from the side windows of the vehicle.
And how about well, we haven't defined it yet, but what is frit? Can you explain to the jury what frit is?
Frit is the black opaque border you'll see in like windshields and also in rear windows. It serves a couple of purposes. The main one on a windshield is it gives the installer a place to apply the adhesive, so it sticks to the window stays in place. You'll see it on the rear window as well. It creates just a natural boundary for the glass, so it's not so stark visually. You'll also see frit in the side windows. If you ever see the little numbers and codes on side window glass, sometimes it even says who made that glass. That's going to be in frit. Frit is a ceramic coating basically that put on screen printed onto the glass, and it's fused to the glass. It's almost impossible to scrape off. So it's part of the glass. If I see frit in casework on 2 different samples, I can compare that frit as well as the glass.
And were you able to identify frit in any of the samples that you were provided with?
Yes, some of the standards had frit, the black frit on it.
Can you identify which item numbers? And if you need to refresh your recollection by reviewing the report, you can do so.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Item 6 had some numbers in frit on one surface, and there was frit on some fragments in item 8 as well.
And that was an indication, was that also an indication to you that this was coming from a vehicle as opposed to another source of glass? The presence of frit?
Yes.
How about item, specific as to item number 8, defroster. What is the significance of that?
The rear windows on vehicles have that defrost capability, and it's basically a metal wire that runs the surface of the glass. Occasionally I see that in casework, so if I do see that, it's an indication that that is a rear window glass source. And item 8 in this case did have a defroster wire or a metal coating that was consistent with defroster wire on one surface. And the item 8 was from a rear window.
Okay, and you mentioned in your opinion regarding the fact that it's your opinion that the latter possibility is considered unlikely. How are you able to narrow down the probability of that second hypothesis?
There's a couple of things that factor into that. One is the fact that I'm using discriminating techniques that distinguish glasses from one another, different sources of glass. Like I said, I'm looking for differences. So if I find a difference, then I can say that these two samples are not like one another and it could not have come from that source. So when I don't find a difference, then I can say that they're like one another. The question is, it either came from this source of the standards, the vehicle, or from another source. That other source would have to have the same exact characteristics. So in this case, you'd have to have a source of two types of glass, light blue, green, and dark gray in color, that were broken. They have to be broken to be deposited at a scene, and it would have to be at that scene. So the pool of potential sources that exist is limited. Not every vehicle is going to have glass like the glass in this case. Not every Jeep may have glass like the glass in this case. Like I said, over time, glass can change from one plant, and glass will vary from plant to plant. While it is possible that another source deposited glass at the scene, and it was exactly like the glass in this case, I find it somewhat unlikely just based on those factors.
Okay. The fact that it would have to be another vehicle with broken glass, so it wouldn't be every Jeep on the road, correct?
Correct, it would have to be broken.
A motion to confer, Your Honor? Nothing further.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a short recess.
We have no questions.
No questions?
No questions.
All right, so is this witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. You can step down, sir. You're excused. Ladies and gentlemen, we are recessed now. Do not discuss the case. Don't form any opinion about the case. Don't allow anyone to discuss the case for further research. Keep your notepad on your chair. Thank you.
I apologize for interrupting the court.
Thank you. Let the record reflect the jury stepped out. Counsel remain along with the defendant. Anything to discuss, counsel?
Nothing, Your Honor.
You need a restroom break, Mr. Dennis?
Yes, sir.
Yes, will you arrange for that for Mr. Dennis, please?
Thank you.
Thank you. You're in recess.
Your next witness is
Francine. Yeah, we'll go through the photos.
Gary. You have cameras right there?
chat, everybody's going nuts about like, yo, what's this? What's that? This is a trial. You have to understand that when you're talking about a criminal trial like this, it's going to be a process, and you're not going to get big ooh-hoo, aha moments. What I recommend, if you're really going to sit there and watch this trial with me and the rest of us who are watching, try to focus in on what's actually happening. Every single witness that they put up, every single question, there's a method to it. There's a reason. So, you know, when they sit there and they start cataloging all the different numbers, like, oh, what's B10, what's B12, what's B13? The reason why they're doing that is because then the defense could argue that, oh, well, how do you know that a random, you know, bullet didn't get slipped in, or none of this stuff is going to be entertaining to the viewer. So if you're going to watch it from home, you have to sort of accept that premise. You have to understand that you're not going to get aha, shocking moments. That if you stay tuned, when the defense starts putting out witnesses, when other certain witnesses of interest come, there will be some shocking moments here and there. But for the most part, we saw that, you know, with the opening statements. But for the most part, a lot of the expert evidence is going to be dry. It's going to be slow, and sure, but there's no way around it. You know, one of the big things that you're seeing people do is something called chain of custody. Chain of custody is an issue where, well, how do we know that the evidence that you're presenting to us here in court today is the exact same evidence that was retrieved from the crime scene 4 or 5 years ago now? And so that type of thing is all about saying, like, all right, well, here's the day that we got this, here's the day we got that, here's the day we got this, here's this person's signature, here's the ceiling tape. A lot of that stuff is going to be happening. For the most part, execution is going to be done with the boring stuff for at least the rest of the week. And then the interesting stuff will come from the prosecution. What I'm interested in seeing from the prosecution is what witnesses do they have that get into motive? What witnesses do they have that get into the relationship? Because we're starting to see that that's the big. So if the prosecution doesn't have something on that, it's going to be a big problem for them. The other big thing that we're looking at for the prosecution is the text message. At some point, the prosecution is expected to introduce the text message that says, I did that shit, and we'll see where they go with trying to prove the context on that. Pico, we got any questions in the chat? You can relay them to me. In the chat, Pico, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer. Good questions only. No, did he do it? None of that. All right, well, I'm inside the courtroom. We're going to be I'm outside the courtroom. This is what the hallway looks like. I went to another floor, so it'd be a little less quiet. All right, does it look like people are heading in yet, Pico? All right, we're going to have an extended break here. Should I go get us some coffee? What should we do? What should we talk about? Anybody in the chat got any good ideas for what topics to cover here? Who got arrested? I don't know. Maybe they're talking about Boosie. Boosie was here yesterday. I didn't get a chance to say hi to him, but he was in here looking fresh. Can we get some recommendations for where to eat in Fort Lauderdale? Because listen, man, if I have another empanada while I'm out here, I'm gonna freaking die. um, All right, everybody. Looks like everybody's heading back into the courtroom. I'm gonna go take my seat. We will be back shortly. I'll try to see you guys in the chat. Thanks, Pico. Let's get back to the stream. All right, guys, I don't know what is going on here, but this has been a recurring thing with this trial where we're supposed to have a 5 or a 10-minute break and it just becomes 15 or 20. I'm gonna see if I can figure it out. Just take you into the courtroom, little insider access. Do we know what's taking so long? Yeah, I mean, we still haven't gotten started. By this time, we got an hour and a half until the afternoon. Barely gonna get anything done today. This thing's gonna take forever. All right, Pico, I'm gonna head inside, take my seat. Hopefully this thing gets started here soon.
set?
They're ready.
Counsel, you ready to go?
Yes, Your Honor?
All right, let's bring the jury in, please. Jury entering. Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect the presence of our jury as well as the defendant, Mr. Demons, his counsel, the assistant state attorneys. And I think you are Michael Kelly, is that right?
Yes.
The next witness, could you raise your right hand for us?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your full legal name for the record.
Michael Kelly.
Please spell your first and last name for the court.
And Michael is M-I-C-H-A-E-L, Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y.
Thank you, sir.
Please, have a seat. That microphone in front of you will adjust up or down, but does not move back and forth, all right?
That's the one.
Ready to go, sir? Counsel, you may.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Kelly. How are you today?
Good afternoon, I'm fine, thank you. Bit cold in here, it's cold in here.
Mr. Kelly, where do you work?
I work for the Miramar Police Department.
How long have you worked for the Miramar Police Department?
I worked for the Miramar Police 21 years.
What is your current job description?
My current job description is crime scene supervisor.
Prior to becoming the crime scene supervisor, what other hats have you worn at the Miramar Police Department?
You become the supervisor, obviously you're selected. You move up from being a crime scene investigator to be supervisor, and with the right qualification for the job.
In terms of the time frame that you've been a supervisor, how long is that?
I've been a supervisor for 16 years now.
Prior to that, how long were you a crime scene investigator?
Say it again, sir.
Prior to that, how many years were you a crime scene investigator?
Before I was crime scene investigator for the first 6 years.
What types of training and education do you have to work in crime scene?
Training, that's a very, very good question. I remember answering in federal court a few months ago. What is the main requirements to be a crime scene investigator? Now, it's not just one master's, PhD in crime scene. Forensic science, yes. Biology, chemistry. But crime scene is a multitask job. And one of the best ways to be working in this field is to be certified with the International Association for Identification, which is a worldwide forensic body. And for crime scene certification, it's every 5 years you have to take recertification, exam, physical exam, practical exams, and it's ongoing. It doesn't just stay the same. The forensic field keeps changing. Now, as you see, the term is over here. They take the bar exam once in their career.
So,
But crime scene is
So let me interrupt for just a
ongoing.
moment.
5 years, every 5 years, different material. Why? Because it's changing. You have to have continuous
Investigate.
education.
Are you certified by any accredited body?
Yes, I am certified in crime scene investigation and forensic photography.
How long have you held those certifications?
How long? So, well, I just took my recent one for May of this year.
Okay. How long prior to that have you had it?
Since I'm on my 4th certification, so I've done it under 20 years.
In terms of casework, how much of your day-to-day work is in crime scene and forensics?
I was, apart from supervising, I went up to supervising and mentoring, coaching, training people. So I would say most of my 80% is actual crime scene work and 20% supervisory.
As part of your duties as a crime scene investigator, did you have the opportunity to respond on October 26th of 2018 to Memorial Miramar Hospital?
Yes, I did. And unfortunately, my day starts when somebody else ends. In this case, 2.
So, Investigator Kelly, with regards to your primary role that day, what were you assigned to do?
I responded to this hospital, this Miramar Hospital, emergency driver. I go there frequently. That's what emergency room's for. Everybody gets shot, stabbed, end up in the hospital. So we was called for this scene to assist the investigator, Morgan Curran, who responded first. And I responded to assist, and I worked on the driver of the car. And when I got to the hospital, there's the Jeep, gray Jeep Trailhawk, multiple bullet holes. And I started with the Jeep photographs first, and then with the driver to process him.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the photographs that you took on that day. I'm now approaching what's been previously shown to defense counsel and marked as states AAA for identification purposes. The photographs that are attached here. Have you had the opportunity to review those prior to coming into court today?
Yes, I did.
Do they fairly and accurately represent the photographs that you took on October 26th of 2018 at Memorial Miramar Hospital?
Yes, they do.
Here at this time, the state would request to move states AAA in as a composite of photographs in a USB and published to the jury.
Sure, any objection?
Subject to the
Same.
standard representation with respect to the contents of the USB.
Correct.
No
Okay.
objection.
You're making that representation, counsel? Yes?
Yes
And
again.
how many photographs are there?
So it's just one moment, Your Honor, and it's going to require me to do math, so please bear with me. There's 81 and 11, 92 photos in total.
Thank you, so it's a composite 92 photographs.
States AAA would be marked states 50.
Okay, starting with the initial Jeep photographs. Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury why you take a photo of a clipboard?
This is the first photograph I take for identification. It's the photo signing sheet, so it shows me the case number, like 2018, the month, and the actual case number, which is 06269. The type of case it is. Was it sexual battery? Was it a burglary? In this case, it's a homicide, and then I write the address to show the location. And underneath you'll have the date and the time when I first started taking the photo.
So the 0645, is that military time?
Yes, that's the time. It was 6:45 in the morning, but the time when I started taking the photographs.
The next photo, is this documenting what?
I was trying to show where the location is. And if you have a street sign, wonderful. In this case, you have this hospital.
When you're looking here at this photograph, what view are we looking at of the hospital?
We're looking at an exterior photograph showing the emergency driver. And as you can see, it's been sealed off with a yellow barrier tape. the marked police vehicle. So that's the exterior with a photograph showing the actual emergency room driver. And the next photograph will show the
Please.
overhang, which is the patient flopper emergency.
And the screen in front of you is a touch screen, so if you can always touch it to highlight
I
areas
can
of the
touch it?
photograph.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
So if you could move the
So-
red cursor to the subject vehicle that you were there to initially document.
So it should be the vehicle.
Okay. Moving on to the next photograph.
The next photograph is the vehicle again. It's a dark gray Jeep Compass, which is called the Trail Hawk model.
And in terms of this little item up here in the top corner, do you know what that is?
Yes, that's the hospital's
Sorry.
surveillance security camera.
Moving on to the next photo. What are you showing here?
Well, that's photographs of the Jeep, and the driver's door was open and the passenger driver's side door was open. So I took photographs of the Jeep in situ, how we find it.
Do you manipulate it in any way at this time?
Nobody in that. So the next photograph shows the rear of the Jeep.
Okay.
To show the windshield was completely shattered. More angle, and that was the tag numbers, identify the vehicle.
And what tag number is this vehicle identified by from the state of Florida?
Was that?
What state of Florida tag number is this vehicle identified by?
This is the Florida tag, the tag number AKD22.
Thank you so much. And finally, moving on to this exterior photo.
Well, this would show passenger door window smashed, the rear passenger door window was smashed, and then you can see bullet holes in the passenger door, the rear passenger door.
Okay. What
Well, as
are-
you notice now, the daylight starting to arrive. So the lighting changing a little bit. Same picture of the Jeep. The two doors I mentioned before are open.
So, Investigator Kelly, do you take overall establishing shots first for a specific reason?
Correct. That's what I call my establishing picture to show what evidence is there.
Are you looking for evidence and potential evidence while you're taking these photos?
Yes, I'm looking in what I'm photographing, and eventually I'm looking underneath the vehicle. I did not go inside the vehicle. Why? Because I was informed that I had to obtain a search warrant.
Investigator Kelly, when you're taking these initial documentary photos, do you have any briefing or any background information about what has supposedly happened?
The only thing I was told, it was a drive-by shooting. The driver drove up to the emergency room, patient drop-off with two victims, both with gunshots. So that was the only information I'd received at that point.
Do you make contact with detectives who are doing interviews while on scene?
Yeah, I made contact with Detective Hector Bertrand and gave me a brief, and he then requested me to process the driver of this vehicle.
Okay. So we're going to continue forward with the vehicle itself. Is there a benefit to taking photos in daylight versus under the artificial fluorescent lights of the hospital?
It does help a little bit in daylight, but daylight you can see, of course. And but it's still in shadow, it's still dark. So that way, when it's dark as it is, I have to use the flash more to show these pictures, try to show the details of the bullet holes.
Do you label them or mark them in any way at the scene?
Say it again, sorry.
Do you label or mark the bullet holes in any way at the scene?
No.
So going forward through the photos of the Jeep,
Yeah, this is I didn't go inside the vehicle, but I could take photographs from the open doors to show the interior. This is the rear passenger seat. And as you noted, there's many items, there's thick congealed blood, there's many items inside the vehicle.
do you remember what the weather was like that morning?
Say it again, you said?
Do you remember what the weather was like
The
that
weather
morning?
was hot, humid, 84 degrees Fahrenheit. It wasn't raining, dry, humid. Early morning fog. This is a rear trunk area.
And it's still, you're not entering the vehicle in any way, shape, or form for these photos?
Yeah, and there was a bullet hole back there. This is the VIN number.
I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger.
Mhm.
What is a VIN number?
So the VIN number here is 3C4N JDDB2JT198929.
Okay.
And
What are you documenting in this photo?
this is the driver's seat and various items inside it. This is the exterior of the driver's door. Then again, notice some marks, the damage to the vehicle in the hood, the bumper area.
As a crime scene investigator, do you respond out to run-of-the-mill car crashes?
I didn't understand the question.
Do you go to hit and runs on the side of the road as a crime scene investigator?
I do hit and run.
In terms of the documentation that you do for a crash, is that something as part of your training and experience that you would have been done over the past 20-some years in crime scene?
Yes, I do have experience in photographing vehicles involved in that too.
Okay.
And of course, when you do, for example, if there's an accident vehicle, you do want to document the damage to the vehicle.
Okay.
The hood is damaged. As you can see, it's misaligned there.
Did you have any idea as to when that damage could have occurred?
I have no idea how the damage occurred.
What is your job when you're doing this?
Document, collect evidence, and process evidence.
So after you finish doing all of the exterior photos of the Jeep, what do you do next?
As I explained before, I then went to meet the driver of this vehicle.
Do you make sure that this Jeep is sealed?
What do you mean? Let's see.
Do you secure the doors and other areas of the Jeep with evidence tape?
Yes. Prior to a search warrant, we will then seal out the vehicle with red evidence tape.
Moving on, there is now a photo placard A in this photo.
A is a bullet projectile, which is by the passenger side rear tire.
Is that the item in question?
This is it. Correct.
And do you know what this little gray round thing is over on this side?
That was the valve stem cap from the tire.
In terms of this view here, why do you take multiple photos of placard A?
Take multiple photographs, you show the location, general shot, establishing shot, and then close-ups. And the next photograph shows the seal, I'm sealing up the vehicle, red evidence tape, which I put my initials and date on.
Okay, and you do that around the entire vehicle?
Yes.
How do you transport the vehicle from the hospital?
We could use a tow truck service. And when we do tow, so for example here, A and B, I document it being put onto a flatbed, and then I escort it to a secure facility. So in that way we know nobody touches the vehicle, nobody opens the door, they don't break the seal. So we use a tow truck to take it to a secure facility.
Do you then secure it in the facility and secure that with evidence tape as well?
Correct. And we take it to the, this was a wet substation, and I seal up the doors, lock the water shutters to preserve the evidence.
Okay. Going now to, you mentioned you processed an individual at the hospital.
Correct.
Who was that individual you processed?
Name was Cortland Henry.
When
So-
you're, where was Mr. Henry being held or kept?
It's in this room, so photo shows isolation exam room 18.
Was anyone else in the room with Mr. Henry when you went in there?
There was an officer guarding him, yes.
Is this how you found Mr. Henry when you entered? Did you explain?
So I photographed victim, a suspect, I photograph them, and search through how you find them. I also look to see if there's any visible injuries, any blood on the hands, for example, so I'm photographing the hands. And we photograph tattoos, any form of identification marks.
And was Mr. Henry wearing a hospital-issued identification tag or bracelet?
Well, there's a hospital identification tag for Henry Cortland.
So the items over here in the floor, what are those?
These are the clothing that Cortland Henry was wearing when he came into the hospital. Now, I didn't see him wearing the clothes, but that's what the responding, the first officer told me. This is his clothes that was in the room with him. And typical hospital procedures, they take off the clothes. Which is why every time we go to the hospital, they're all naked. Why? They remove the clothing. And there's two bags here. One has the footwear and the other bag has the clothing.
Okay, I'm going to start and show you what's been previously shown to the defense counsel as states C. Do you recognize this item?
Yes, I recognize it.
How do you recognize this?
Oh, it has my handwriting on it. It has my initial date, and it does give a description of what it is.
What is that item?
This item is a t-shirt, black t-shirt with Drew Film Edit written on it.
And is that item in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected it?
Yes, it does.
Was there 2 cuttings taken from that shirt and done by you at a later date?
This was collected from this shirt, yes.
Is that shirt packaged as it was after you took the cuttings?
Yes, this is how I packaged the evidence after I had collected my evidence from this item.
Here at this time, the state would request to treat states C in as our next exhibit
No objection, Your Honor.
52.
It'll be admitted.
States C marked states 52.
Investigator Kelly, if I could be so kind as to ask you to publish this shirt. There are gloves to your left, and I will grab you some scissors.
skip the lunch. I go for extra lunch.
And if you could show the small logo on the front of the t-shirt first.
Yes, this is the front of the t-shirt.
Okay. And if you so kind as to show the back.
And this is the back of the t-shirt.
Thank you so much. If you would be kind enough to repackage that. Now showing me what's been marked as state triple D for identification purposes only. Do you recognize those items?
Yes, I do recognize this.
What are those items?
I listed the 3 items in the package. And they are the cutting from the blood stain on the front of that t-shirt, and a cutting from the rear of the t-shirt. And then I have a swab from the blood stain on the Air Jordan sneakers, which is this.
And is that in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected that and processed it?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would request to state triple D in as states 55.
Without objection, Your Honor.
53.
Thank you, they'll be admitted without objection.
States triple D, marked states 53.
Okay. So with regards to the cuttings that are in there that you described, are those subsets or taken from that shirt that was introduced as states 52?
The first 2 items were taken from Drew Phil Edit t-shirt.
Okay. So I'm now showing you what's been marked as states triple E for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
It is the hoodie, black hoodie, and also the t-shirt has been removed and repackaged. But the other item inside here is a plastic container, blue plastic container.
And is that item in the same or substantially same condition as when you retrieved it on October 26th of 2018?
Yes,
You said one item was repackaged. What was that item?
the t-shirt which I just shown you before.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would request to move states triple E in. as
Without objection, Your Honor.
It'll be admitted.
States 54.
States triple E, marked states 54.
You'd be so kind as to publish the sweatshirt from in there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, if you can package that back up, I'm going to give you now what's been marked as state triple F for identification purposes. Do you recognize states triple F?
Yes, I do recognize this.
What is that?
These, the sneakers, these sneakers that are in the photograph there.
Are they in the same?
Inside here.
Are they in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected them on October 26, 2018?
Yes,
Here at this time, the state would request to move states triple F in as 55.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
It'll be,
States,
it'll be admitted.
states, triple F, marked states 55.
Okay. I want to go back out to the scene of the Jeep again for a moment. Did the projectile by photo marker A, did you recover that particular item?
I did.
Okay, now approaching with what's been marked as states triple G for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize that item?
Has my writing, evidence seal, a description of what this item is. And that's the flattened bullet projectile, which I use the photo marker A from the crime scene photographs.
Is it in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected it on October 26, 2018?
Yes,
Here at this
how
time,
clear it was back in 2018.
here at this time, the state would request to move states triple G in as states 56.
Any objection?
No objections.
It'll be admitted.
States, triple G, marked states 56.
So going through the photos here, go back one. Did you conduct a analysis on the hands or process the hands of Cortland Henry?
Yes, I did what you call GSR, gunshot residue, GSR.
Did you
Test.
do one or two of those?
I do 2 tests.
Okay.
Now, there's always this dilemma, which one you do first. In this case, I did the evidential one first for laboratory testing. And my secondary test was a presumptive test.
So I'm going to approach with what's been previously marked as states triple H for identification purposes only. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I did.
How do you recognize that item?
My handwriting, my evidence seal, and a description of what this is. It is a gunshot residue evidence collection kit. This is a collection kit we use for laboratory testing with the SEM, which is a scanning electron microscope.
Does Miramar have a scanning electron microscope at the police department that you can use?
No, it's a scanning electron microscope is not optical. You may remember from your science days when you could look through an optical magnifier of blood, see those squiggly things moving around. But because gunpowder residue is too small, you need electronic scanning microscope. It's not optical, it works by electron. Almost like a sonar radar. It's ping and bounces back. And that's the only way you can see or detect gunshot residue. You have to remember,
So investigator Kelly, may I interrupt you for a moment? Is that item in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected it on October 26th of 2018?
yes it is.
Here at this time, the state would request to move states triple H in,
Any objection?
No, sir.
It'll be admitted.
states 56,
57.
57. Thank you, Travis. Okay, so now looking back up at the photo that's up on the screen, if you could describe what is the next gunshot residue test that you did.
This is a photograph I took of the presumptive GSR kit I did from Cortland Henry. And the photograph, you put the description of the name, and I try and take a photograph of the actual results.
And can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you interpret these results?
To interpret these results, you're looking at blue specks, which will react. It's a chemical reaction to the nitrate. So blue specks will give a positive identification.
So on here, there's kind of a reddish brown. Is that a positive identification?
Well, obviously, when you swipe somebody's hand or swipes, you can get grime, blood, and so forth. It's not blood, but other articles will attach to the swab. I couldn't see any real blue to me.
No.
I couldn't see it in the test.
So going forward, did you have an occasion where you collected DNA swabs regarding the victims in this case? Were they given to your care, custody, and control?
DNA swab from who, sir?
That would be DNA swabs 3, 4, 49, 54, 87, 88, and 89.
Yes, I did collect these.
Are they in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected them in 2018?
Yes.
And then, for the record, this has been labeled as states III for identification. And this time the state would offer states III into evidence as states 58.
Any objection?
No, sir.
They'll be admitted.
States III marked states 58.
Okay. I'm approaching with what's been previously shown to defense counsel and marked for identification purposes only as states BBB. Do you recognize those photos?
Yes, I did.
Did you have the opportunity to review them before coming into court today?
I did.
Do they fairly and accurately depict the processing of the items that we just put into evidence?
Yes, they do.
Is there an additional photo of items that are no longer in the custody of the Miramar Police Department?
The additional photograph will be the jewelry. I didn't collect that at the hospital. It was handed to me later by Officer Hadley.
Did you process it and document that jewelry?
I did.
And in terms of the disposition of that jewelry, do you know what happened to it?
No.
Would that be documented on a property receipt?
Of course.
And do the state's photos and states BBB fairly and accurately represent your documentation and processing?
Yes, it does.
Here at this time, the state would request to move states BBB in and publish to the jury.
How
No
many
objection.
photographs are there?
No objection, Your Honor.
One moment, Your Honor.
States BBB will be marked states 59.
Let's see. Deposit.
I have a USB, and I will tell you in just a moment how many photographs. $18 photographs, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel.
Okay, going here, there's a number and a letter associated with this image. What does that tell you when you're looking at it?
Yeah, this is a photograph of the clothing, and I give it a new identification mark A for the clothing.
Did you separate the shirt from the sweatshirt and document it further?
Correct. Sweatshirt and t-shirt together, and the blue container.
Okay. The item in now photo marker labeled B.
Yes, I've given the container B for identification, and it shows the cannabis.
Moving on to the item that's labeled C. Is that what has been previously entered into evidence as the shirt?
Yes, this is the t-shirt I just shown the jury, and this is the front of the t-shirt.
Was there an item of interest on the front of the t-shirt?
Yeah, we had 2 small specks of blood on the front of the t-shirt. That's a close-up photograph to show small specks of blood.
Same close-up photograph of that?
Yes, that's close-up.
Moving on to the rear of that
And
t-shirt.
this is the rear, and there's another small speck of blood on the rear. And that's very small.
And in terms of, how do you know this is the rear versus the front?
So I've given the C for front, C for right, C front, C rear.
And so did you then process and document the sweatshirt?
This is a sweatshirt, and these are the sneakers.
And one of the items that you put in was a swab of a blood stain from the sneakers. Is that indicated in the photo we're looking at here?
Yes, on the right at the bottom there of the sneaker, there's a very small blood stain.
And then the jewelry here that was given to you for processing by Officer Hadley.
That is correct, this is the jewelry.
So that, gone through most of what you did on October 26th of 2018 so far. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you do to prevent cross-contamination while you're analyzing items in the lab?
To prevent cross-contamination, we change our gloves frequently for every item you handle. Of course, wearing a mask. And wearing tie-back protection where required if it's blood stained. Everything you can do to prevent cross-contamination. You can package each item separately, handle each item separately with the gloves on, and keep changing. It's surprising how many boxes of gloves you go through when you do that.
Do you document every single time you change your gloves? Do you write it down in your report every time you change your gloves?
Not every time, I just put in a brief part of my body of my report, I change gloves frequently.
Okay.
I don't specifically say how many gloves I use, it's just that I change frequently per item.
Okay, going on to October 31st of 2018. Did you assist Miramar Crime Scene Technician Christopher Carter in documenting the search warrant of the Jeep?
Yes, I did. I helped him with moving the items, changing them in gloves, turning over both sides and so forth. So I did assist them, yes.
Did you assist later on November 25th of 2018, did you assist Morgan Curry with processing an MVAC filter?
Yes, I did.
Going forward to November 28th of 2018, did you assist in doing a trajectory analysis?
Yes, I did.
And so what was the goal of the trajectory analysis?
The goal for this trajectory analysis was basically to show approximate height of the shooter. At this time, I didn't know where the original shooting had taken place. The hospital was the second proceeding. So, using trajectory strings and rods, I can determine approximate height of the shooter. In this case, it's between 5'10" and 4'8".
And in terms of the shooting reconstruction, is that a separate procedure that is done as opposed to a trajectory analysis?
Correct.
The information that you had with regards to a drive-by, was that still the information you thought when you were doing this trajectory analysis?
Yes, that's still the only information I had at that time.
The cuttings that were made, was that done on or about December 24th of 2018?
In December the 24th, I'm sorry, what did we do then?
The cuttings, is that a
Oh,
correct?
yes, and the cuttings. The T-shirt I just showed you, I took cuttings. The reason is, the labs usually prefers a cutting sometimes as opposed to a swab. Why? It gives them a better chance for a DNA extraction.
In terms of other times that you were called out, did you assist some of the other crime scene technicians with processing the vehicle in various ways?
I did assist my staff with various other aspects of this investigation.
Other than what we have previously talked about, did you collect any other items of evidence?
Not to my knowledge, no.
In terms of the keys to the Jeep, were those present when you were doing these various search warrants?
Sorry, who was present?
The keys, the car keys.
Oh, the car keys.
Were
For the
they
Jeep?
Yes. Were they provided?
Yes.
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Counsel, thank you.
I think this might be one.
Sir, cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, sir.
Briefly, you're ready, you may.
Thank you. Sir, how are you? Good. Thank you for being with us. Just have a few questions to clarify. You began, well, let me start where you finished, about this trajectory, the trajectory analysis that you did. You said that the purpose of your trajectory analysis was to establish the approximate height of the chute.
Yes, that's what I said.
Would
One
that
reason.
be one reason? And the other would be to determine the flight path of the projectile in question.
That is correct.
Okay, so, may I, Your Honor?
Yes.
So, and you used string to do this?
Strings and rods.
Strings and rods, okay, let's set the rods aside for a second. The strings that you used, the way that you use them is that you affix them to the bullet holes that you saw.
Correct. To try and fix a string, we use like a glue tack.
A piece of gum, essentially.
Okay. It's a good way to say it.
Right.
Piece of gum.
So you took a piece of gum, and if I may approach, let us assume, would you step around here and help me out? Let us assume, for example, that this witness stand is the vehicle. And you perceive there to be a bullet hole at this location.
Okay.
So demonstrate for me, I know we got the bullet hole string affixed to the bullet hole with a piece of gum here. Tell me how you proceed from there.
If there is a bullet hole in the gum, the next very important item you need is another hole. A good bullet trajectory you need 2 or 3 holes. Give you some idea of the flight path. One hole is very difficult. You can't tell which way the bullet trajectory is coming in.
Okay, so let's just to be clear. Any of the analyses that you performed, you did on at least 2 holes that you assumed or concluded represented the flight path of a single projectile. Correct?
Correct. If you just remember that you've got the rear windshield completely shattered.
Okay.
So there's no holes in the glass,
Right?
but it's going into the rear seat.
Okay. So one of the holes would be the first hole in the back of the rear seat, and the second hole would be where?
If it goes through, through, then you have to move.
Okay, so the holes that you analyzed with your string and gun were holes that perforated the back of the seat and you could tell where they exited another part of the seat?
The ones in the seat finish there, like, some bullets get into it, but it didn't continue to the front seat. I know one did, but you're talking about the string area, it ended there, it didn't continue after.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to figure out where the two holes are. One would be the back of the seat and the other would be the front of the seat. Okay, so those were your two holes.
Yeah.
All right, well, take us from there. You have one hole in the front of the seat, right? And you have a hole in the back of the seat. The seat might be wider. And you affix the string on which side of the hole?
Whichever area you can attach the gun to. Is it possible to do that? Usually it's on the outer area.
Well, if it's on the outer area, how are you sure that you have identified the correct trajectory as it relates to the hole in the front of the seat?
Swing is for this part, and then you can use rods for the other part. So you have to push it all the way through.
So there you would push the rod through the hole. It will come out on the other side, the front side of the seat, which would indicate to you the trajectory. And then you affix the string on the back of that rod, and then you extend backwards. Okay, and that's how you proceeded.
Generally speaking.
So there was no string that was affixed to the back of the seat that was not done so
Yeah.
in relation to a rod that had been put through the hole.
Right, because string is too fragile to go through.
Understood.
The reason why I use rod to string. The string is because you now have an area to attach to, so then the gun will go from this way.
Okay, but the angle that you extend the string backward is dictated by the rod that has been put through the hole and meets the other hole in the front. That's a yes?
That's.
You don't sound
Say
sure.
it again, so you say it again.
The angle that you extend that string backward from the back of the seat is dictated by the angle of the rod that has gone through that hole to the hole in the front.
You're saying that the angle from the rod is dictated by
The angle of the string is dictated by the angle of the rod that you had already placed through that hole,
okay,
right?
I agree about that.
That is, I'm not the expert, you tell me. Is that what happened?
I agree.
Well, is that what you did?
I don't remember now, but I
Wouldn't you
remember the
have?
swing part. I
Excuse me.
remember.
I'm sorry.
One at a time.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Can't talk over
That's,
one another.
that's my fault. No, don't go. I need you here. I understand if you are having failing recollection. This was a while back. But as a scientific matter, would it not have to be the angle of that string coming out, at which you extended, would it not have to be dictated by the angle of the rod that you have placed in there? Would it have
You
to?
can't make a difference. You have to remember, bullets don't always go completely straight. Bullets twist, turn, up and down. So your theory is, it's possible, but anything can happen with bullet trajectory. Flight path doesn't always go smooth and straight.
I understand that, okay. And I assume it's not,
To try and determine from just two holes with no exterior, it's difficult.
okay. So you're up against a difficult task, let's concede that, right? And in performing that task, how, if you didn't dictate the angle that you extended that string backward by the rod that was placed inside, how would you know what angle to extend backward?
Don't know exactly.
How do you know anything?
It's
Guess what?
An approximate angle, the height is what I'm looking
But I mean, the height's dictated by two things. The angle that that string extends backward, and the location of the person who fired.
at. Correct.
Okay, so if I'm Shaquille O'Neal,
Yes.
I could fire from here, and I would be up here. And if I were Gary Coleman,
Counsel testifying.
Pardon me?
Objection, counsel testifying.
and if I were Gary Coleman, remember different strokes? Short guy. Okay. If I was a short guy, and I was firing from here, it would create the same angle as it would if I were Shaquille O'Neal back here. True or
No,
false?
that's a very interesting thing.
Okay.
Especially from a defense attorney. But you have to remember, people shoot, if you, normal people, you expect people to shoot high level, right? But who knows what you're gonna shoot again? You can shoot down here, you can shoot like this. So it's never, you know, your theory, oh, it's gotta be this way, it has to be this way. You don't know unless you actually witnessing the shooting and an angle of how the gun was held. So your theory is, I think it's possible.
Right.
You shot here, you shot at there.
Thank you. So, let me clarify. If I have two people, one is 4 feet 8, one is 6 foot 2.
Okay.
Let us assume for purposes of my example that they both are extending the firearm at the same angle from their bodies, from their respective bodies, okay?
Objection, Your Honor, lack of foundation. Counsel is testifying.
Why don't you come stop?
Come on, man. Okay. So, we're assuming two different people at two different heights. A short person and a tall person, okay? Assuming they're both extending the firearm from their bodies at the same angle, the person who is this short would expel a projectile that would enter whatever the target is at the same angle as somebody who is this tall. Can we agree on that fundamental principle?
I agree.
Okay. And as you correctly stated, there are even more variables. That is, and I wasn't trying to outsmart you, couldn't do that. They could be firing at one angle, could be firing at another angle, at any variety of angles. So in order to determine the approximate height, which was what you were attempting to do,
Excuse me, turn off the phone, please.
which is what you were attempting to do, right?
That's what I was attempting to do.
Okay.
Answer your question.
At least approximate.
Approximate.
Okay.
Like I said, I don't know if it was a drive-by, moving, I don't know.
Okay.
So it's one part of it.
So now we have several variables. What angle the person is holding the gun,
Correct?
how far back they are,
Correct.
and how tall they are.
Good. 3 factors.
3 factors.
Yeah.
So with all those 3 variables, which one did you know?
I did not know.
You didn't know any.
I do.
So would you agree with me that when you have three variables at a minimum, there are probably more that we haven't considered, three variables that affect your analysis, none of which you know, you would agree with me that your exercise was essentially a futile one?
Well, you have a good point. Could it be inaccurate? No.
Could be.
And the other parts of the exam as well, we've not mentioned.
That would even create more possible inaccuracies, right?
You don't know, so would you try to work out what happened? Where it was shot? Who was shot? Approximate angle.
Understood. You said you don't know everything. In this scenario, you don't know anything, correct?
I agree with you now. I didn't know anything about what happened.
Okay.
I never saw the video. Wasn't on scene.
Okay. So knowing nothing and embarking upon essentially a futile exercise, knowing nothing going in means that coming out of that exercise, you know nothing. Correct?
Well, the way you say it makes it appear that way. Maybe.
Make it appear different for me.
In what way?
Well, what I'm saying is,
Yes.
if there are several variables that affect your experiment, none of which
The
you...
witness resume his seat and
Sure.
Mr. Howard resume
Sure,
the podium.
I'm sorry. Please, resume your seat. I don't mean to be...
Theatrical.
Excuse me, Counsel. Have a seat, Mr. Kelly, and Counsel, just resume asking your questions, please.
Thank you, sir. If you're engaged in an exercise that requires you to know certain factors, and you know none of them,
So your question is.
I'm sorry. Come side for a second.
we have a court reporter who's trying to keep track. I don't want to talk over you, and I don't want you to talk over me, so we have a complete and accurate record, okay? Let me finish my question. If you're engaged in an exercise that requires you to know certain variables, and you know none of them, strike that. The exercise in which you were engaged requires you to know certain variables, correct?
It does require you to, if you know the variables, it certainly will help you, yes.
And if you don't know the variables, any of them, then you cannot perform an accurate test.
It's difficult to perform an accurate result if you do not know all the variables, correct?
Okay. I just want you to change one word in that statement. It's impossible, not difficult. It's impossible.
Objection arguments to.
Sustained.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is it possible?
Well, anything is possible. Huh? It's like you may have cheated on your bar exam. I don't know. Possible? I didn't say all that's bad. It's possible.
Right.
Anything is possible.
All right, now let's bring it back to what I was just saying. Is it possible to conduct an accurate trajectory analysis if you do not know the height of the person involved?
I disagree with you, because flight trajectory doesn't always come down to height of issue, it's also angle.
Okay. So if you know the distance at which the person was, and you know the trajectory, then you can determine the height. Right?
It's possible, yes.
Okay. And if you don't know the distance, and all you know is the trajectory, which you are approximating to begin with, it's impossible to determine anything that's useful to an investigation. If the answer is yes, just say yes.
Yeah, I disagree. I don't think it's impossible. It's still some valid forensic work, in my opinion. You can say what you like. You can tell the jury what you like. But you wasn't there. I wasn't there. You can say, oh, anything's possible. Maybe. But we still don't know exactly what happened.
You have anything you want to add to that?
Objection, Your Honor.
You also conducted, I believe, a swab of Mr. Cortland Henry's hands, did you not?
Swab from his hand, you said?
I'm sorry, let me ask you this. Did you conduct a swab that, of Cortland Henry from any part of his being?
From Cortland Henry, I collected oral swabs for DNA.
Okay. You didn't do any swab on his hands at all?
We did the GSR collection.
Okay, so that you don't refer to that as a swab?
Correct.
I'm sorry. So you did a GSR, you attempted to do something to his hand to determine whether or not he had GSR.
The purpose of GSR will give you an indication if you fired a weapon or you've been in close contact to when a weapon was discharged.
And you conducted a test on site,
Correct. Called presumptive test.
a presumptive test. And you also sent, what is the thing that you sent back to the lab for the other test?
That is the Tritech evidentiary gunshot residue collection kit for the scanning electronic microscope, which is valid in court. It's a scientific test.
And your presumptive test showed negative.
Correct.
And you know that a lab test showed positive.
Outside the
That is
scope,
correct.
objection.
Sustained.
Let me ask you this. Was your presumptive test accurate?
Objection, Your Honor, outside the scope.
Motion side.
You did a analysis, you tell us,
what, Council?
I have what I believe to be a report of his. I'd like to take a peek at.
Sure. Go
He
ahead.
needs his memory refreshed. He doesn't.
I want him to identify.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And maybe I should mark it for purposes of identification as defendants 1.
Use letters for identification.
Oh, I'm sorry. Defendants A.
We'll mark it for you.
Yeah, in terms of the report, I have an objection if you want to put sidebar.
Sure. Sustained.
Can I have him identified, please?
Go right ahead.
Thank you.
Sure. We have comment.
Okay, may I, Your Honor? I'd like to approach you, sir, and show you what I've had marked as defendants' exhibits for identification purposes only, A and B. And I want you to tell me if those are both parts of reports that you authored.
Okay?
I also want you to tell me, without revealing what the context is, if the items identified as Roman numeral 1 through 8 on Exhibit A is intended to convey information of the same nature as those that are labeled 1 through 8 on Exhibit B. Not if they're the same thing, but if they're intended to convey information of the same nature.
So your question is, say it again.
I want you to look at both.
Excuse me, Counsel, why don't you come sidebar, please?
Do it another. Did you look at that?
Yes, I did.
Am I reading correct? Sorry, strike that. When you were determining approximate heights of shooters, did you determine the approximate height of a shooter at 2 feet 8 inches tall?
No, what you're referring to on the report is not the height of a shooter. That is, the bullet holes on the passenger side of the door was the actual measurement from the ground up to each bullet hole. It's just to show the height.
Okay.
Nothing to do with bullet flight.
Okay, that's what I
And,
wanted.
and I can explain, as I'm trying to explain to the jury, you need 2 to 3 bullet holes through 1, 2, 3 to give you some indication. If there's just one bullet hole, it's not, how can I say, it's just no real forensic tests to determine a proper bullet flight path if you only have one hole.
Okay. So the indications 5'10", 5'3", 5'1", 4'10" are approximate heights.
Sustained. Hey, sure, come sidebar.
sir, came up with height trajectory, the highest one you came up with, not trajectory, the height of shooter, the highest one you approximated was 5'10", correct?
What I previously said was approximately 5'10" from the rear shooter.
The lowest, the shortest shooter height that you approximated was 4'8", right?
That's what I said, is that the approximate angle from that with a 4'8", yes.
Approximate angle or approximate height?
I mean approximate height, I'm sorry.
Okay. And you also approximated a height of 5'3",
Yes, I did.
and you approximated a height of 4'10",
I did.
and you approximated a height of 4'9",
I did.
and you approximated a height of 5'1".
Correct.
Okay. Let's get back now to the blood analysis or swabs. Strike that. The blood observations you made on the clothing that belonged to Cortland Henry.
Okay.
You analyzed a sweatshirt and a t-shirt, right?
What I would call it a hoodie.
A hoodie. Okay.
Yeah.
A hoodie
T-shirt.
and a t-shirt.
Correct.
And you found any blood on the hoodie?
No. Not on the hoodie.
But you found blood on the t-shirt.
Yes. Underneath the hoodie.
You found blood on the t-shirt underneath the hoodie, both in the front of that t-shirt and in the back.
That is correct.
Okay. One second here. Was there ever a time that you went inside the vehicle
Which
at issue, the gray Jeep that we've seen several pictures, photographs of that you took?
if you're referring to one that's at the hospital, I didn't go inside the Jeep at that time.
Okay, so you never retrieved any of the items from inside?
That's correct. I did not retrieve anything inside the Jeep.
The only reason and only time that you went inside is when you were sticking your gum and string on the seat, right?
The only time I really went inside that Jeep was when we had the search warrant for when I attached the strings and rods. Yes, that's correct.
And you were telling us that in your report, you typically document the fact that you change gloves,
Say it again. You said it's fun that
that you change latex gloves during the process of your handling of evidence,
that is correct.
but you don't necessarily document each time that you do.
I find it difficult to put in a report every time you change gloves, like every time you open a door or so forth. So I usually put in the body of my report, I change gloves frequently for each item I change.
Okay.
As opposed to listing, I changed a glove for this item. Next sentence, I handled this and I changed the glove for this one, and so forth. So to make it more clear, concise, just easier to say, logical to say, I change my glove frequently every time I handle a piece of evidence.
Okay. So, the way that you phrase it in your reports is that I change my gloves frequently to indicate that you're changing it several times. Correct?
Correct. Well, but I can to say, the purpose of this is so we don't create any cross-contamination. Now, my DNA is not on any of the evidence. Neither was my fingerprint. Why? Because I change gloves frequently. I don't touch the evidence with my bare hands.
Another way that you can contaminate evidence, as opposed to putting your own DNA and fingerprints on it, is by transferring DNA from one item that you are handling to another.
Correct. That's called cross-contamination.
And the way that you avoid that is when you handle one item, you use one set of gloves, right?
Correct.
And then when you're gonna handle another item, you change gloves so as to ensure no cross-contamination.
That is the general procedure, crime scene work, handling evidence.
Okay, and it's not only a general procedure, it's a necessary procedure, or you could engage in cross-contamination.
Of course, it's crucial you don't contaminate evidence.
So if you find, for example, and you're a supervisor
Correct.
in this area of crime scene analysis, right?
Right.
Okay. So if you find, for example, a number of articles in the same location, is it still proper to change your gloves when you're dealing with each item?
Difficult to say. I know myself, I change my gloves, even though it's in the same area.
And why do you do that?
I don't want to create any cross-contamination. That's why I want to go to a scene, I've always got my box of gloves with me, change. And we go through them frequently. And the fun thing is, the command staff always complain about the cost, which using too many gloves. Fortunately, part of the job. Changing gloves.
Thank you.
Okay.
Nothing further.
Thank you, sir. Is there any redirect?
Briefly, with regards to the trajectory rods and string, you document heights of items. Are you documenting the height at which the trajectory was coming out of the back window, where the back window would have been if it was still in place?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Is this witness excused?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you, Bill.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's 5 o'clock, so we'll call it a day. Tracy, sidebar, sir. I was just checking and verifying with council, so we'll see everybody back at 9 o'clock. Do not do any research, don't discuss the case, don't form any opinion about the case, don't allow anyone to discuss the case in your presence. Just leave your notepads on your chairs, we'll be back with you tomorrow. Have a good Let the record reflect the jury stepped out. Counsel remain along with the defendant. Anything to discuss? Spence, no?
No, sir.
See you back tomorrow at 9. Thank you.
Judge.
Sorry.
Don't do it. Thank you, folks.
Where's it going?
Doesn't have my stuff on the court tonight. Thank you.
I appreciate it.